Our next speaker, Zane Pulumbarit, is COL's resident fund specialist. He is in charge of analyzing the different funds offered by COL. He drives the development of investment strategies and portfolio allocation based on the current market environment, with a focus on mutual funds and unit investment trust funds. Zane is also a graduate of the Calum Trading Institute's Global Market Trader Specialization Program, in addition to being a certified investment solicitor and a certified UITF salesperson. A warm round of applause, please, for Mr. Zane Pulumbarit.
Hi, everyone. Oops, sorry. Good afternoon. Right? So I hope you all had a good lunch today. So the topic that we'll be talking about is building an effective portfolio today. So I think Edmond laid out a good backdrop of what's currently happening globally and how it's affecting our investments locally here in the Philippines. So in today's environment, paano tayo makakabuo ng portfolio of investment that will suit the kind of situation that we are in, right? And to add on to what kind of situation we're in, right? We're seeing uneven returns across the world. Okay? So start of the year, right? People were thinking that emerging markets will be the one to lead the equity world. Okay? So Hong Kong, Philippines, China, they are the ones who were thought to be or poised to be the one giving the returns. But so you can see, during the start of the year, nag-rally yung Philippines, nag-rally Hong Kong. Right? But now we're seeing they're pulling back and they're now on slightly below where we started from the start of the year. On the opposite end, yung mga ina-expect na magkaka-recession like your US, Europe, right? They're actually the ones who are performing much better this year. Okay? So you can see that the market is ever-changing and continue to be volatile. Okay? And with that case, yung goals natin, they remain the same. Right? Markets change, but our goals do not. So how can we try to capitalize on these opportunities so that we can continue to grow our portfolio, our investments, regardless of these market conditions? Okay? So most likely that your growth will come from different sources, and that's what we'll try to talk about today. Right? Yan. So investors have to broaden their investment. So hindi na pwede isang investment lang meron ka ngayon. You have to diversify to capture these opportunities out there. Okay? So one, to properly manage your risk. Okay? Two, again, to capture the multiple sources of growth. And three, adapt to the changing market environments. Okay? So hindi na pwede na isa lang yung investments nyo. Right? But before we go to how you can diversify in this type of market, let's first have a look, ano ba yung properly diversified na portfolio? Right? So a properly diversified portfolio, hindi yan yung sabihin natin, may isang stock ako, nope. Hindi rin yan sabihin, may 5 stock ako, may BDO, Jollibee, BPI, SM, all good quality companies, right? But if something happens to the local market, syempre, damay-damay yan. Okay? A good example was last year, right? When the peso was rising from 50 to 59, right? It would have been hard for the Philippine market to rise. Right? So even though you're holding good quality companies, right, which in the long term, right, we expect to perform, during that time, it would have been hard for the local market to push. Okay? So how can you diversify? Right? Meaning, dapat yung diversification mo, you're not just holding local stocks, you're holding global stocks, you're holding REITs, you're holding bonds, so that you can capture itong iba't ibang opportunities out there. Right? Pero, hindi naman yan yung dagdag ka lang ng dagdag. It's not anything, everything, pasok, diversification. Diversification doesn't work that way. Okay? Diversification means you have to be intentional. Intentional ka when you want to add risk or when you want to lessen your risk. Okay? So hindi lang yan, dagdag lang tayo ng dagdag. Okay? So normally, when we want to lessen our risk, yan, that's where we try to put in fixed income, bonds, money market, time deposit. Okay? And then, if we want to add risk to capture potentially higher returns, that's when we try to add stocks and other investments in our portfolio. Okay? So again, hindi pwedeng pasok ka lang ng pasok ng kahit ano. You have to be intentional, especially since all of us have different goals. Okay? So since we have different goals, iba-iba tayo ng willing na i-take na risk for our investments. Okay? So in today's market, how can we diversify? Yeah. Okay. So building an effective portfolio today. Right. So what we're seeing now is that you need to have bonds in your portfolio. Okay. And bakit naman bonds? Okay. So last year, right, bonds and equity markets have been under pressure kasi ang taas ng interest rates. No? BSP, the Fed, they're all raising interest rates. Right? But now, you can actually take advantage of those interest rates. Okay? Right? So in the last 16 years, no, huli tayo nakakita ng interest rates na 6.25 sa Philippines, 5.25 sa US, 16 years ago. That was way back in 2007, 2008. Okay? So you can take advantage of these high interest rates by having an allocation to bonds. And in that sense, you're also having lower risk because normally these bonds are offered by governments, corporations. So another reason why you need to look at bonds for your portfolio, right, is that it benefits when interest rates start to go down. So for example, no, yung bond A, yan, 6%, was offered today, right? Imagine kung meron kang bond at the end of the year that was offered 5%. Alin dun yung mas valuable? Dati, binibigyan kang 6%, ngayon, 5 na lang. Right? So, essentially, pag vinalue mo, mas mahalaga yung 6%. Right? And that's why, when interest rates go down, bond prices go up. Okay? So, once interest rates start to go down, we see that there is still potential for bonds to perform. Right? And we have seen this historically over past crises. So, noong 2008 global financial crisis, yan, ito yung performance ng iba't ibang types of bond funds out there. 2018 inflation surge. So, kung malala nyo, ito yung rice crisis noong 2018. So, yung inflation ng Philippines sumipa to 7.8% during this time. And then 2022 COVID pandemic. Right? Noong nagbaba ng interest rates ang BSP so that the companies can borrow at lower interest rates. So, during these periods, na nagbababa ng interest rates, bonds actually perform really well. Okay? So the best performing ones could perform high single digits to sometimes even double-digit returns during this period. Okay? So you're going in with a lower risk and may potential return. Right, so that's the opportunity we're seeing in bonds right now. And since bonds invests in mga longer maturities, 2-3 years, right, nalalaki nila yung interest rates na yun. That's why they're able to perform this way. Okay. Next is, if you need to park your cash, you can put it in a money market fund. Okay. So yung sabi natin kanina, bonds, they're able to lock in interest rates for a longer period of time. Eh, paano kung hindi ko naman kailangan ng longer period? I just need to take advantage of these interest rates for the short term. Okay? And that's where your money market or your time deposits, high interest rate accounts come in. Okay? So if you have a shorter time horizon, let's say weeks to a month, right, you're just waiting to enter the market, naghanap lang kayo ng magandang opportunity to come in, right, you can actually put this in those types of instruments. So in that way, your cash still earns even though hinaghihintay lang kayo to deploy it, whether you want to invest it in your stocks, whether you want to invest it in bonds, at least your spare cash is earning interest. Okay, yep. Okay. So the third one, yeah, is to look for income-paying instruments. Okay. Si Ms. Joyce kanina, right, she showed you opportunities in REITs and preferred shares to generate consistent and regular income to your investments. Right? So that is a crucial part of an investment portfolio now, especially na we expect there could be volatilities ahead. So having yung regular income na yun will help you offset yung uncertainty, the volatility, while still able to hold your investment. So hindi ka natatakot, the emotions aren't there, or the emotions aren't grave for you to hold your investments longer. So ano yung mga income-generating opportunities out there? Right? So earlier, they talked about Philippine REITs. So on average, Philippine REITs, yung annualized yield niya is 7.1%. Right? And you also have these other options out there. So Global Preferred Fund, ito yung mga preferred shares, pero global. Right? So it's 5.8%. You have a Global Multi-Asset Fund, which is invested in both stocks and bonds. Right? 5.7%. And then you have your REIT funds na pwedeng in Asia, pwedeng in global. They're also earning a decent 4.4 and 4.1%. So why are we sharing these other options with you? No? Kung 7.1 yung Philippines, why do you need to consider all these other options? Well, for one, these options are well diversified already. Since these are funds, okay, you can already ascertain na marami itong REITs na hawak. You're not only holding one REIT, two REITs, three REITs, you're holding various types of REITs and other assets in that type of fund. Next, one of the, I guess, best selling point ng mga funds na to, which we saw that investors really like, is that they provide monthly dividends. Okay? So some funds of this here, nagbibigay silang dividends every month. Okay? The rates or the yields are still the same, dinidistribute lang nila every month. Okay? So for me, if you receive those dividends every month, or yung income na yun every month, there is an opportunity cost when you're waiting for, let's say, semi-annual or annual na payout. Okay? So that's where some of the advantages of these other instruments come in. Okay? So kung nakakatanggap kayo every month, you can reinvest it, or you can already use it for your expenses. Okay? So those are the types of ways you can utilize yung mga ganitong instruments for your investment. Right? So maraming mga income-paying options out there, especially now that interest rates are high. Next is certainly over the long term, we know that stocks perform the best out of all these options. Right? So regardless of the market sentiment that we're in, we need to gradually position for growth. So dahan-dahan tayo nagtatry mag-take advantage of these opportunities. And earlier, right, Charles mentioned how cheap and valuable the companies are in the Philippines. But aside from that, I'd also like to encourage you to look at global opportunities or expand to global horizons. Okay? So this has been the stock market performance through the years. Right? So if you were able to diversify, right, let's say you diversified through US, China, Europe, or India, right, you're able to tap onto these other opportunities outside. So hindi kayo limited or restricted to what's happening in the Philippines. And consequently, right, if there's something bad happening outside, you can still invest locally. Okay? So maraming options out there that you can look into. Right? And these are your largest economies that drive the global growth. Okay? So I would suggest that some of you probably have to look at these types of opportunities out there. Okay? And again, as mentioned by Edmond earlier, although there are risks in the market today, there are still reasons that it can go up. Okay? So a good example of this would be the German DAX, ito yung Germany index, right? Which I would like to focus on two key points. No? So maraming nangyayari during that time from 2022 until now, 2023. But I'd like to focus on 2 points. Okay? So around July, September, right, dyan na nagsimula yung news of a potential global recession. Okay? People were already talking about slowdown, no? The economies will go into recession. And certainly, markets went down during that time. Right? But as you can see, after the next few months, no, with some other catalysts for the German market, it reversed its course. Okay? And now it's already back to close to its all-time highs. And just 2 weeks ago, tsaka sila nag-announce ng recession. Okay? So what I'm trying to say here is that staying in cash for too long can be costly. Right? Kasi you would miss these kinds of moves that are happening only when the market is already sold off. Right? Okay. So am I saying na, akit na yan? No? Well, honestly, I don't know what's going to happen in Germany. Right? They still have risks. No? Naiwasan nila yung energy crisis last year, but we don't know if they can avoid it the same time this year. Right? But what's important is you gradually position for this. If it goes down, right, then that could be a good opportunity for you to come in again. So hindi naman kailangan all-in ka on the get-go. You need to gradually position for growth. Kasi over the long term, right, we know that these types of instruments tend to outperform. Right? And so it just shows now we're much higher from when we started for Germany. Next is to ride the rising themes and trends out there. Okay? So one, probably the most well-talked of theme or trend ngayon is yung AI, ChatGPT. Okay? So diversifying globally can allow you to access yung mga ganitong types of trends or themes. Right? You also have clean energy. So these are the types of developments that could potentially, right, develop or shape the future of the world. But I guess how can you participate in this? And then to also add a bit of caution. Right? My perception is that when you're trying to take advantage of this, you really have to be dynamic. Because some of these trends develop, right? Nagtutuloy-tuloy. But some of these trends fade. So if you look at the Gartner hype cycle, yeah, normally that's how hypes are made. Okay? Right? Yung expectations ng mga tao for the product or for the service goes really high, and then suddenly, hindi pala ganun ka opportunistic. So when that happens, stocks get sold off, and then they go into what's more realistic. Right? So we've seen this happen over the course of the years. In 2013, yung 3D printing. Right? So people were expecting na during this time, everybody will have a 3D printer in their homes. Right? Well, as we know, hindi naman pala lahat kailangan ng 3D printer. Right? So eventually, that hype failed. 2017, 2018, that was the time where cannabis was trying to be legalized in the US. Right? So meron ding upward move, and then eventually, right, those fade. When they realized that, okay, recreationally and medically, this is hard to push through into the market. Okay? And then the last example would be the dot-com crash in 2000. Okay? And this is one where I would point out na not all of these, so not all of these themes or trends, right, fade. Some of them, after the bubble pops, eventually, if there is a use case for the world, right, eventually they run. So dito nag-grow yung mga companies tulad ng Microsoft, Amazon, since they were the ones na naiwan, or they were the ones remnants from these types of bubbles. Okay? So I guess to some of you here, I will just to share na you have to be dynamic in these trends. Okay? As they develop, right, which is an opportunity for us, or as they fade. Okay? So it has to be some kind of caution there. All right? So building an effective portfolio today, right, have 4 components. One, you need to have bonds in your portfolio. You can park your cash in a money market. Still, you need to gradually position for growth and look for income-paying options. Right? So this is how you could build a portfolio in today's environment. Okay. And one of the simplest ways to do this is to actually have funds in your portfolio. So to those of you who are not familiar, right, let me just give a quick recap kung ano yung funds. So funds, they are a type of investments na pinagsasama-sama yung pera ng iba't ibang investors. And what happens to that money is that it's invested by a fund manager. Okay. Saan naman nila ini-invest? They invested in equities or stocks. They invested in bonds. They invested in money markets. So iba't ibang types of instruments. And normally, yung pagkakaisip ng mga tao or common misconception is that they only invest in stocks. Okay? But there's actually 4 different types of funds, the most basic types, that they can invest in, depende kung ano yung pinag-invest nila. So may money market, may bonds, may balance, and may equity funds. Okay. So a few reasons why funds are great is unang-una, it's affordable and accessible. for as low as 500 pesos, you can easily invest in a fund. Okay? So for those who are just starting or beginner investors, it's not hard to start investing even if you have a small capital. Okay? So next, it's professionally managed. Okay? This is especially important if you want to diversify globally. Right? Because sometimes we don't know what stocks are out there, what markets are out there. But through a fund, you can easily diversify and invest into that kind of market. And that will lead to the next point, which is yung quick diversification. And lastly, these instruments are highly liquid. So compared to if you invested directly into bonds yan, or time deposits, minsan may lock-in period yan. So you need to hold your money for that long period of time, whether that's 6 months, 1 year. But through funds, you can actually invest and redeem them whenever you like. Okay? So mas liquid siya na instrument. So you're able to take advantage of opportunities. If you want to lessen your risk, you can manage it. Or if you want to add your risk, you can also do that the same way. Okay. So COL, we have more than 50 funds in our platform, right? And it is offered by the different fund managers in the Philippines. You have CMI, right? So COL Investment Management. But you also have Atram, Sun Life, ALFM, Phil Equity, Manulife, and First Metro. So maraming options out there depending on the fund that you want, or sometimes even the fund manager that you're looking for. Okay? But to simplify the choice for you, right, we've cataloged some of our preferred funds out there. Okay? So here are top fund picks. Okay? If you want to park for the short term or your money market, right, we prefer Manulife Money Market Fund. So compared to other money market fund at this point in time, yung Manulife, they're able to take advantage of the very short rates out there. So yung hawak nila are mostly 2 months, 3 months. So nare-reinvest nila agad at high rates, which is why they're able to outperform other money market. For bond funds, you have the Sun Life Prosperity Bond Fund and your Manulife Income Builder Fund. So kanina pinakita namin yung historical performances. These two have historically performed well when interest rates decline. And that's because mas mahaba yung duration exposure nila. So they're more sensitive to interest rates when interest rates move up or move down. Now, for positioning for long-term growth, dyan na papasok yung equity index funds. Okay, so these are the funds that invest in the index. So sa Philippines, you have your COL Equity Index Mutual Fund. And for global, you can look at Sun Life Prosperity World Equity Index Feeder Fund. Okay. Now, for your regular payout or income-paying fund, we like ALFM Global Multi-Asset Income Fund. This is a fund that distributes dividends every month. So this is why we like it, kasi yung opportunity cost of you receiving that versus receiving something semi-annual could be very useful, especially for those na merong consistent expenses. Right? Okay. So here are some funds to add on your watch list. So in COL Fund Source, we actually have other types of funds already that invest overseas. So merong nag-invest in US, India, China, and even other themes, like clean energy, technology, healthcare. So if you want to diversify further, these are some of the other funds that you can look at. Okay? So country funds, if you want to add more risk or you want to invest in a specific country, and then thematic funds if you want to invest in specific sectors. Okay? All right. So with that, let's just try to summarize yung points that we've laid out today. Okay? So growth in today's market will come from multiple sources. Right? So it's just appropriate that our investments are also diversified in different sources. Okay? So one, we can take advantage of interest rates through bonds. Okay? We can park our cash so that they earn a certain yield from money market funds or your time deposits. Okay? You can earn regular cash payouts from other income-paying instruments to REITs or income-paying funds. And lastly, we can gradually position for growth both locally and globally through the different funds available out there. Right? So with that, again, I'd like to thank everyone for listening to our talk today. And hopefully you were able to realize that even though markets are tough and volatile, there are ways that we can manage our investments so that we can continue to grow them to reach our goals. Okay? With that, I'd like to thank everyone again for listening. And that's where I finished.
Thank you, Zane. May I ask for your permission to put you in the hot seat?
Yes.
Thank you so much. As per usual, we'll be taking questions here in the middle. Maybe mas naenggaan nyo na kayo ngayong after lunch. Please feel free to just use any of the mics, the 3 mics here in the aisle. Or, of course, you can also send in your questions via Slido. To start, Zane, I'll be very candid with you.
Okay.
Some of our investors here, I myself included, are already overwhelmed actually with the local market. And now we have here, while it is an exciting opportunity, we have here the opportunity to participate in the global market. What should investors keep in mind so that it's not so overwhelming?
I guess for one, no, so that it's not overwhelming for investors, they can start to look at only one country, right? So US in particular has been the largest economy in the world. So you can probably start there, right? Normally what happens in the US reflects what's happening in the Philippines. So hindi kayo ma-overwhelm na, oh, marami pa palang ibang bansa na pwede kong tignan, right? So that's one way to do it. And again, index funds are the easiest way that you can tap onto these opportunities.
And we do have a couple of global index funds, yes?
Yeah. And from a personal point of view, right, for me, how I keep track of this, syempre, I try to be updated. So I read the news, right, ano ba nangyayari, right? So that when the market moves, I am not shocked. So if it moves down, I'm prepared. If it moves up, I'm prepared.
As we've learned in the morning session, it's important to be a smart investor to kind of have an update, keep yourself updated of what's happening in the market. That's true. Next question. You mentioned, you showed that slide with so many partnerships with esteemed fund partners, CMI included. But that's resulted in over 50 funds on the platform then. I guess same question. What's your thought process when you select a fund?
Okay. So ako, when I select a fund, I start first with the goal I'm trying to fulfill. Okay. So that already narrows down yung options for me. So an example, I'm expecting a huge expense next year. Right? So I'm getting married next year. So my risk profile probably isn't that high. You know? Kahit bata pa ako, I'm not going into those high-risk options. So may malaking portion ako that I allocate for less risky investments. So that's one, right? So define your goals. How do you want to invest through it? And now when you're filtering through funds, that's when you try to look at ano ba yung strategy of the fund that you want to invest in. So if you want to invest in a bond fund, you need to look at how these fund managers differ, right? And certainly we try to help with that with the materials we provide. Because I guess what people often don't understand, or maybe hindi nila not common knowledge for people.
Maybe they forget.
These fund managers, iba-iba rin yung strategy nila when they invest. So bond funds, may iba't ibang types of bond funds out there. And one way to simplify it is to just read up what the strategy of the fund manager is. Okay. Similar then for equities, right? So we have equity funds before na they invest in high growth companies, mga speculative companies. So when investors invested there, they were happy kasi they were performing. But when interest rates went up, right, tinamaan agad yung mga companies na yun. Those were the first ones to get hit by high interest rates. Right? So I would suggest na aside from setting your goals, the next step would be to really understand what the fund is doing. Just read the overview, saan siya nag-i-invest, paano, right? So that you can differentiate them from the two. And from there, it's just a matter of investing and clicking the buttons for it.
Identifying your goals and then matching them with the strategy of the fund. Not very new actually to what we've learned in the morning sessions, but always good to be reminded. Minsan, it's really the same principles over and over again. You just have to practice lang talaga.
Yeah.
But no different with funds. We talked about tech, and I'm actually very interested in this. It's been getting so much hype, and we've also learned earlier in the previous session that we also have to look at not just market sentiment, but also the growth outlook. For tech, how do you view it as a theme? Is it something sustainable or is it hype?
So I guess I would categorize theme first, no, not just tech. Now, if you're trying to invest in themes, I'll go back dun sa intention. Are you planning to add risk or you're planning to lessen risk? Okay. So if you're planning to add risk, then you need to have those themes that can provide you those kinds of potentially higher returns. But you have to keep in mind that these are also risky, right? So the way you want to diversify initially, if you have a core portfolio, is through an index fund. Right? That's the easiest way you can diversify. And then themes will just be an addition if meron kayong gustong sakyan na trend or whatever's happening in the market. So that's when you try to use themes to go in. But you don't use themes, at least personally for me, you don't use themes as the core investment that you have. Right? As we've shown earlier, sometimes themes develop, and sometimes themes fade. Okay? So you need to be dynamic in your approach there. So going back to tech, what am I seeing in tech right now? So what's driving the tech, and I think some of you here who's watching the US market, right? Tech has been the outperformer this year. Right? And to share with you, yung tech fund has been up by 38%, so very high yung naging returns niya this year. And that's because of two reasons I'm seeing. One is the flight to liquidity. Right? So since maraming concerns in the US, what people are doing is they're going to these large cap companies, which are mostly tech. Right? Yan yung Facebook, Meta, Google. So they were hit hard last year, but fundamentally, these companies have large amounts of cash. Right? So dun nagpunta yung mga tao for defensiveness, no? Liquidity. Instead of your traditional na utilities, healthcare. And the second one is the AI trend. Okay? So that's what's propelling it further now, yung AI. So for me, no, it's very hard to discern which one yung nangingibabaw, right? Especially as the market tries to go up. So are people trying to position more for liquidity, safety, kasi ito yung largest companies, or are they trying to ride the trend in AI? Okay. So for me, how I view tech is, yes, it might be something I want to look at and continue monitoring, but given the height that it's run this year, right, I might probably wait some time to let that hype die down, and maybe that's when I try to come in and invest in tech. But if you're a more aggressive person, you really want to go through it, I suggest just put in a small amount, okay? So that you're not afraid with the money or capital you put in. So unti-unti lang, right? If the trend continues, then you would probably read more about it, you'll see what's happening out there, and that's when you try to add a bit more.
Admittedly, kasi nakakadala siya, no? But
Yeah.
thanks for putting that into perspective. All right, let's take a few questions from our live audience. On Slido, how much should I have in order to diversify?
Okay, so from a monetary point of view, ang dali mag-diversify from funds. As low as 500, 1,000 pesos, you can already mix and match yung different types of funds out there. Right? But I would suggest normally, if you have a small amount, you can stick with a core goal that you have. Okay? So if your core goal, let's say yung amount ng capital mo, 10,000, 50,000, I understand na medyo mahirap mag-diversify, even though the minimums are quite small. So you just focus on your core goal first. If your
No problem.
Core goal is protection, capital protection, then you focus it on that. If your core goal is growth, then you focus on your equity funds. Now, as you grow your money, let's say 100,000 meron ka, it's much easier to diversify in these instruments. And normally, what people think is you need a very large amount of money to diversify. And honestly, hindi naman. No? Kasi sometimes people think you need to be rich or kailangan mayaman ka lang for this to be useful to you. But as we grow and build our wealth, yung goals natin nag-expand. Right? So kung dati long-term ka lang, baka ngayon meron ka ng pinaglalaanan for your medium term, for your short term. Right? And then that's where diversification matters at any point of your portfolio, whether maliit or malaki. Right? So to go back dun sa question, how much should you have to diversify? Honestly, you don't need to have a lot. it's easier if you have, let's say, 100,000, mas madali mag-diversify. Kasi you can accurately choose how much you put into what goal you have. So if you have a smaller amount than that, just prioritize what your core goal is.
Because as you said, we have funds with entries or minimum investment requirements of 500, 1,000. That's the range actually now of all the funds on the platform. So there. Again, we encourage everyone here also in our live audience, if you want to ask a question directly, just raise your hand. We'll bring the mic to you. For now, we'll take another Slido question. Which long-term thematic do you think will continue to develop?
Okay. For me, the long-term thematic, and this is my personal opinion, na nakikita kong will continue to develop will be your clean energy. And the reason being is that we're seeing more government put in money into those sectors. Okay? So kung may government backing yan, I think it's a bit hard for these types of themes to fade. Right? So recently, I think last year, US introduced yung Inflation Reduction Act. So they allotted a significant amount of money for renewable energy. So for a long-term theme, I think that's one that will continue, right? But as I've shown earlier, right, sometimes there has to be a hype, and then when it goes down, that's when these things start to naturally grow over time. Okay? So again, with the thematics, you need to be dynamic with it.
Just to complete the picture, Clean Energy is a fund that invests in, based on the name, renewable energy, innovations in that space?
Yeah. So that fund na nag-invest sa clean energy, right now, they're prioritizing beneficiaries ng clean energy. So they're focusing on semiconductors, the technologies that will help drive clean energy. Kasi in the future, we don't know who will be the largest energy producer, might be this company or that company, but all of them will need the access and the shovels to actually put these energy-producing resources to use. So the fund is now positioned, we talked with the fund manager recently, and the fund is positioned on the semiconductor space kasi yun yung feeling nila, right, will be useful for developing the clean energy space in the future.
Thanks for that. Any more questions? Oh, there you go. Personally, how would you organize your portfolio today?
So I think I mentioned kanina na...
May personal touch ka na kasing binanggit eh. Tuloy mo na yun.
So personally, again, I have a large expense I am expecting next year. Right? So how I'm building my portfolio today, 50 I'm on bonds. Right? So I'm really
50%.
50% on bonds. So I'm really not taking a lot of risk in my portfolio. Right? And that is diversified sa local and global bonds. Okay? And then the rest, right, I have 30% in equities and then 20% in cash. So yung 20% in cash na yun is something I will use, I will deploy once I see that there are opportunities out there. So for me, ganun yung allocation ko ngayon.
Thank you for sharing. Any more questions from our live audience? I have a question, Zane.
Okay.
You are one of the few people who is an expert in funds in COL, right? What's a fun fact you would say? We don't usually get to hear from you. I think when we talk about stock market, I mean, it's there, stock, equities, right? So what's something interesting you can share about funds?
Something interesting. I think a lot of people, or maybe this is probably a bias, but I think some people look at funds and they look at it as boring naman yan, tagal gumalaw, right? And
Sino nagsabi niyan? I'm just kidding.
And admittedly, that's the difference between trying to invest directly into stocks that could move greatly over a day, over a week, compared to investing in funds. But there are a lot of interesting ways that you can use funds to your advantage. No? Whether you're a stock trader or an active investor, right, you can still use funds to your advantage. And one option we showed kanina, you can take advantage of bonds right now. If you don't want to take risk in the market, bonds are your easy option. And it's easy to tap into bonds through bond funds. Hindi mo kailangan matay in sa maturity. You don't need to call your bank to say na, hey, may bonds ba kayo na I can buy? So that's one way you could use it. Other more interesting use cases na I've seen start to develop in recent years with the diversity of funds out there. There's actually a fund na it invests primarily in USD securities, okay? USD fixed income. So, okay, USD fixed income, right? But you could use that as a proxy for when the currency exchange moves. Good example, last year, the peso went from 50 to 59. Okay? So that fund, since primarily invested siya in USD na fixed income, so relatively low risk, and then USD exposure niya, you could ride the change in foreign exchange during that period. So ito yung mga tactical or more nuanced way you could use funds in the type of environment we're in. Right? So I guess yun, some few interesting ways to use funds.
Very interesting. Totoo naman, interesting talaga. Thank you. Okay, still no more takers? No hands raised? O baka I was preoccupied with Andrew's answer. But please feel free to just raise your hand again. On Slido, which countries do you prefer given scenario 1, soft landing or a hard landing?
Wow, this is a hard question. Okay, I guess I'll start first with scenario 2, hard landing. And I think Edmond gave a good background earlier to what potentially could happen sa whether soft landing or hard landing happens. So if a hard landing happens, right, we're not expecting Philippines to drop as much as your US if they do suffer a hard landing. Because in a hard landing, it means that their economy is really having trouble, right? And that all other economies close to them are having trouble. So I think that's where actually Philippines could shine after. No? Once that drop happens, Philippines could shine. Kasi unang-una, right, we're not as closely tied to the US economy. Right? So we're more closed off. Yung economy natin is more consumption-driven internally. We don't have a lot of exports. So what happens to them doesn't have a very huge effect to us. Okay? And second, yung mga investors that are looking for growth, that's when they start to look at valuations. Okay? So, wala. US economy is finding it hard. So what options do you have out there? So we've highlighted earlier, Philippines is currently trading at very cheap valuations. So that is something that could be a spotlight for them, to look at Philippines. So in a hard landing environment, I think Philippines can shine during that period. In a soft landing.
So before you go into soft landing, for hard landing, Philippine local funds then, you mean?
I think Philippine stocks in general, so that will include your funds. So these will be a trend for them. Okay. Now, in a soft landing, I think that's where it becomes more confusing. And confusing for me kasi foreign flows will be divided into different ideas. Right? You have ideas ng AI, right? You have ideas of deglobalization or reshoring that benefits some countries. Okay? So it's much harder, I think, to gauge what a soft landing would happen. Okay? But for me, if a soft landing happens, then the bearishness in the US will probably fade. So US will be a beneficiary of that for sure. So yeah, so for me, that or the two scenarios that could potentially play out given what was shared earlier.
Thank you for that. Here's another question on Slido. Is it safe to put our money in REITs while we are still undecided to buy stocks? Please understand, because this is my first time taking risk in stocks, I definitely don't have an idea about this. Thank you. We're here to help, Karen.
Okay. So REITs. So Ms. Joyce kanina talked about REITs, and we also have REIT funds out there. So certainly, if you're looking for that income payout, REITs are one of your good options. So sa Philippines, the average payout of a REIT right now is 7.1 or 7.5%. So if you're more of a starting investor, that could be something you can look at. Right? So at least nahahawakan mo siya even though markets are volatile. Okay, so yeah, I think REITs would be a good entry if you're just starting to invest for the long term.
Earlier, Karen, we talked about dividend investing or investing in income-generating assets, getting rewarded, getting paid while you wait. We talked about REITs. Just a quick recap for Karen, no? REITs, preferred shares, and then now we have income-paying funds, REIT funds. So those are the options there. Again, you have to assess your goals, your risk appetite, match that with the strategy of whatever the asset has in their portfolio. Hope that helps. Returns of funds are usually less than when you invest in individual stocks. Can you tell me what other benefits funds have in comparison to stocks from Diego?
So returns of funds are usually less kasi they ride the whole market move. Right? So since diversified siya, hindi niya sinasakyan isang stock lang. Right? So when a stock goes up, right, then the fund will benefit from that, pero meron siyang iba't iba pang hawak na stocks. Okay? So that's why normally you would see mas mabagal yung galaw ng funds compared to doing it in individual stocks. So the benefit of funds in this scenario would be, unang-una, your diversification. Right? So if you're the type of investor na you're new, right, picking stocks might not be for you, or you're just starting, you can still invest through funds as an easy way in for you to start investing. The second is, you don't need as much info on each individual companies to invest in a fund. Right? So mas madali yung monitoring, right, research, understanding. That's much easier to do it through funds. Okay, so I think that would be the differences or benefits of investing in funds compared to direct stocks.
I guess then tied to your risk appetite, how much volatility you can manage. Any more? Yes, sir. If we could hand sir a mic, please.
Hi, good afternoon, Sir Andrew. Yes, my question is regarding bonds. So, kanina ko pa actually inisip anong itatanong ko. Pero I'm trying to formulate. My question is regarding bonds. I'm a new investor kasi, so I'm trying to understand paano nag-work yung bond. So, if I'm not mistaken, kunyari, retail treasury bonds, kunyari sa government. If I'm not mistaken kasi, kunyari, if they ask na ito yung price, parang yun yung money na ibibigay mo sa government, parang utangin ng government sa'yo, then they will give you a dividend yield, parang ganun. So, naririnig ko nga in these times na mataas ang interest rates, maganda bumili ng mga bonds. However, I cannot get the math kasi kung ang you get a dividend yield, which is non-compounding pa, and then after, siguro, kung ano yung igano katagal, kaya sabihin yung 5 years, they will return to you yung money, tsaka yung dividend yield. Parang inisip ko kasi, where's the math? If in the middle of 5 years, sabihin natin na bumaba na interest rates, and then parang sinasabi nila is mas maganda yung ano, kumaga, parang mas maganda ibenta ata yung bonds, parang gano'n. So di ko lang kasi makuha yung math, how it becomes, 100,000 yung binigay mo. So parang sinong bibili ng more than 100,000 kung, I'm not sure kung tumatas ba dividend yield nun pagka bumababa ang interest rate. So I'm not sure, di ko lang makuha kasi yung math kung naintindihan nyo lang yung questions ko, yung question ko.
Okay. Right. So, first, I would go yung sa direct bonds. So if you're investing in direct bonds, let's say 2 years, tapos yung interest or coupon niya is 5%, ibig sabihin, depende kung semi-annual or annual siya, it gives you a annualized na 5% return on those coupons. Okay? And if you're planning to hold it hanggang mag-mature siya, yung buong 2 years, what you will get is your principal after. So, kung may 1,000 ako ngayon, I invested it in a direct bond, okay, I would expect to get that 1,000 back in 2 years, yung principal, right, aside from the interest you're getting. So normally, that's how bonds work if you're holding it to maturity. Okay? So what happens if you don't intend to hold it to maturity? What happens then is, for example, yung interest rate ngayon is 5%, right? And your interest rates go down in the future, naging 4, right? Yung value ng bond mo, right? So kung ngayon nagbibigay siya ng 4, right? for it to equal dun sa binibigay ngayon, right, its price must go up para 4% din yung katumbas niya na interest. Right? So that's how bond prices appreciate. So meron pang math yun that's involved, but normally that's how it works. So that you can, if you sell it, merong premium kang nakukuha from selling it. But I guess the difficult part there is normally selling the bonds. As you've mentioned, sometimes if it's a small amount, there might not be enough buyers, or minsan yung liquidity in terms of sourcing bonds out there might be difficult, especially if you're a individual investor. Right? So normally banks can could do this in large amounts, so they're able to transact well. So for bonds na ganun, it's easier to just position through a bond fund kasi you don't have to consider all these other things na, okay, when I get this, do I try to sell this in the market or do I wait for it to mature? So that's one. But to the question na paano yung returns, how does it work? There's a quite complicated calculation to it, right? But to simplify, I guess, yung yield to maturity, so if you're expecting that bond to, let's say, give 3%, tas bumaba yung interest rates ng 2%, and then the duration is 2 years, right? So yung 2 times 2, that's 4, plus the 3 na you're getting. So 7% yung appreciation on the bond price itself, including the dividends. So that's a quick math to do it. I'm not sure if I was able to convey that clearly, but normally yun yung quick way that you can calculate the potential earnings in bonds. So the duration, gaano katagal yung before the bond matures, and then the change in interest rate, plus the interest it's giving at the moment.
Hope we were able to answer it, sir. Otherwise, we're happy to speak with you after, maybe. Nagulat ako, ba't may congratulations? Okay. Ang sweet. Congratulations, Zane. Has your portfolio building strategy changed now that you're getting married and or starting a family? Do you have tips on how to adjust your investments to better fit a change in lifestyle? Managing your finances when you were a bachelor versus now that you are committed. Talagang we built up on this storyline, no? Friend Frankie.
Right. So yung portfolio building strategy certainly has changed. So previously, I was more heavy on equities. Right? Kasi my belief is I can hold it long term. Right? But now na yung priorities ko have changed, I also adjust my investments to those priorities. So I mentioned kanina, I'm more on the conservative end to a certain % of my portfolio. Right? And to the next question, do you have tips on how to adjust your investments? Better fit change in lifestyle?
Baon, de joke.
I guess you would have to look at what aspects of your lifestyle will change. Okay. So are you expecting more expenses in the near future? Right? So mas pinaglalaanan mo ba yun now? Do you need to be more protective of it? Right? So those are things that me personally, I start to think about. So managing finances as a couple versus as a bachelor. Andito eh.
Naiipit siya eh.
But certainly it's easier to manage a budget as a bachelor, right? Kasi ang iniisip mo lang yung sarili mo. You don't think about other people as much. And for me, that's not a challenge na I need to think of another person, right? But it's just another thing that you have to consider. Kasi your money is now not just for you, but also for the person you want to be with or the family that you're building. So I guess as an advice, financial topics, I suggest, should always be discussed within family. It should not be a taboo na, ba't ko tatanungin to pera? It should always be discussed. You should be open about it. Ano yung restrictions nyo? Ano yung kaya nyo, hindi nyo kaya with your money? So that it's easier to manage it as a couple.
Thank you. I love how we've made this transition. But it's a very realistic question. Some of us may be going through the same life stage. Okay, from Anne Garcia. How much should you invest in the global market versus local?
Okay, so I guess the easiest answer to this would be, try it out 50-50. Right? Or if you're uncertain with the global market, right? Kasi nga, it's something that now you have to think about, so may additional process, then allocate, let's say, 10-20% of what you put in your stocks to global funds or global equities. Right? So as you get more feel about it, as you learn more, then that's when you can try to add. So if you're the type of person na hindi yun concern mo, you can allocate 50-50, right? Just to give it a shot. And then, if you're starting, medyo reluctant ka pa, then you just add 10-20% nung ini-invest mo to try out global markets.
Thanks, Anne. Do we have any more questions? Maybe from, yes. We have a hand raised. Thank you.
Hi po, good afternoon.
Hi.
So yeah, one of the questions that I have, and sinulat ko siya actually, kasi hindi ko rin alam kung paano siya i-compose, but I think it's quite relevant kasi one of the bills being fought and passed by the government is the Maharlika Fund. So it involves pension funds and government resources being invested in different asset type. So given the fact that investors, particularly Filipino investors, according to a business journal that I just once read, are not really that confident with the certainty of return, once approved for that, once like naging batas na yung Maharlika Wealth Fund, what do you think can we expect in terms of performance for a Philippine market?
Okay, so firstly, yung Maharlika Wealth Fund is not something na parang mutual fund UITF you can directly invest in. Okay? So that is the fund that the government is managing. Now, what can we expect in the local market based on the fund? Well, if the fund's intention, and right now we don't know how the fund will invest, ano yung plano ng mga managers of that fund. But if the fund invests locally, then maybe you could see na mas may participation or mas may liquidity in the local market. So that will certainly help local equities, right? But I think the fund is also allowed to invest overseas and other instruments. So yun yung, I guess, hard to gauge right now because we don't know what the fund's plan is, right? But if it invests locally, then that will certainly help add more liquidity, add more fluidity to our markets. Yeah.
Definitely good food for thought, something to keep in
Certainly.
mind, stay informed about
Always.
when we learn more. Any more questions? Yes, sir. Last one?
Yeah. Hello. At the risk of sounding like an idiot in the room, the biggest idiot in the room, kasi I just started this year to invest, and actually all my 100% in stocks. In fact, 8%, negative 8% na nga lahat eh. But I still have some cash that I have, and napaisip ako dun sa funds, and I'm trying to put one and one together. So you're saying that if you're medyo nag-hesitate kang, let's say, mag-add on your equities, you can park some of your cash muna here. Instead of buying directly a bond, you can invest in bond funds, and you can actually pull it out
Yes.
in a year or less than a year. Can you do that with the
Yep.
products that you have?
So yun yung isang advantage of bond funds over your direct bonds. Kasi direct bonds, most often than not, you have to hold it until it matures. So yung bond funds, mas may liquidity siya, right? Since the ones who are transacting on behalf of you are the fund managers. So they can buy and sell those bonds more freely. Right? So may liquidity siya so that if you redeem your investment, meron naman sila naka-allocate that you can redeem for it. So it's easier for investors who especially have smaller capital na want to invest in bonds to do it through bond funds. Okay. So yes, so to that question, sir, yep.
To add, sir, or maybe to give us a little bit more context, what's your priority for that 20%? cash? Are you okay for it to stay invested, or will you need it? How many months or longer down the line?
Maybe about a year to invest it sana sa like a bond fund siguro. Something that I can pull out kaagad kasi tuition, yung mga ganun. So I just need to park it kasi nasa savings account lang kasi lang nakakapanghinayang.
So I think
Right.
certainly if the horizon is 3 years, I think bond funds, a year. So I think a year bond funds would be a good exposure right now.
We have bond funds that don't have a minimum holding period, can redeem anytime. The next longest one or shortest one would be 90 days, and then 180 days. But there's one that, again, doesn't have a holding period. So, but maybe look at the funds strategies also, sir. We do have local and international bond funds, but the opportunity that Zane mentioned earlier is very specific to this market because of high interest rates now. But for any other questions, take a look first, and then for any other questions, you can email us, sir. Thank you. All right, this was so fruitful.
Yeah.
And congratulations, sabi nga ni Frankie. Thank you so much, Zane.
Thanks, Rishka. And thanks
Thank you, everyone. Okay, I'll let you go now.